My name is Nelufar Hedayat. I'm an award-winning documentarian with 2 multi-part series under my belt. I have done a lot of impact journalism that has been seen and broadcast around the world on Netflix, on Amazon Prime. I'm very proud of the journalism that I've done, which has been shown in the Italian Senate, in the American Congress, which has changed laws within the European Union. I've been invited to the Vatican to present my findings. And my greatest goal and ambition is to try and show other brown women like me who are of Muslim culture and heritage, who are maybe from Asia or the Middle East. I'm from Afghanistan, to show them that we can and we will.
I think The Traffickers is probably one of your more well-known work, and it was a 6-part series?
It was an 8-part series. So we got an 8-part series, and the premise of The Traffickers is basically to follow a illegal good or service from consumer to source. So we traveled something like 30 countries plus. I did like trips the equivalent of going around the world 5 or 6 times. So it was a very extensive look at the black market that we all are a part of and how we are part of it. So each episode looks at one thing, like maybe things that you're not familiar with, like rhino horns, right? Or ivory, but things that you are very involved in, like gold, like the gold in your phone or on your hand or in your pocket or whatever. So each episode is very, very strategically designed to follow a trail, and we did not hold back, that we showed the reality of the global black markets.
Before we get into that, for me, your story itself is a little bit like a Hollywood story, because coming from a background where your mom had to smuggle you and then your father went missing for a while, I reread it a couple of times just to make sure that I understood it. And each time I read it, it seemed pretty dramatic. But if you can just let the audience know a bit from when you were a baby and how you ended up coming to the UK, which was not even the destination originally.
Right, yeah.
And I read recently in the Daily Mail, I think it was not an article about your mother and how it was emotional for you, where you did a podcast. So a little bit of detail about your background would be greatly appreciated.
Of course. So my background is very, very varied. It's like a tapestry. It involves different scenes at different ages. So I was born in Kabul in Afghanistan under the occupation of the USSR, the Soviet Union. And very quickly, we realized that my life was not going to be possible in a country that was broken in so many ways, broken in spirit, broken in identity, broken in infrastructure, not to mention a war that had gone on for years and years. So my mom decided that the best thing to do was to take me and my sister and flee. And it's a very long and protracted journey of going to Pakistan, coming back, coming back. But in the end, we did leave. My mum's a trained civil engineer, my dad's a professor of mathematics and physics. When that became impossible, it was decided that we should leave. And it was a harrowing journey for years and years, Rahan. Like, it was really hard for all of us. And the plan was to be in Germany, right? The plan was never to be British. I always think, like, I wonder what the German Nelufar would be like, right?
I can guarantee 2 things. One, your German would be a lot stronger than your English. That's for sure. And secondly, maybe BBC would not have been the route which you've taken. You probably would be, I'm sure based on your background, you'd still be involved in journalism or documentary filmmaking. You just might have spoken in a German accent, or German would have been your language. But yeah, very quickly, how much do you remember of this? Because now you're narrating, is this from your mom telling you this, or is this from your own personal recollection?
Exactly. So this is the thing. When you're a refugee of war, as I am, you learn these things later. They become a story you tell about yourself. They're not your story. So my memory of those times are very patchy. I remember certain colors, certain fabrics. I remember certain smells, certain sounds I remember. But the rest of it is I'm filling in the gaps of my memory as a child. There are things that I remember that are really violent. I remember dead bodies. I remember war. I remember the feeling of artillery fire, because a lot of the time, if an artillery fire or a mortar or a shell lands near you, yes, you hear it first, but you feel it. You feel it in your bowels, you feel it in your gut, in your lung, in the back of your head. So I remember things like that from being a child. But it's a really it's like being re-traumatized all the time. But it's also it's my past, it's my story. And I say this in the course correction podcast that you're referring to. In the course correction podcast, I express and I interview my mum for the first time in my life about this. And she's like, oh, do you remember this? Or do you remember, why do you want to do this? And I'm like, because it's my story. It's my story. I have a right to my story. So it becomes really important in those moments when you're confronting versions of yourself that you are unfamiliar with as a traumatized child of war, that you allow yourself to revise and reversion your story. And in the beginning, I used to think, I want the truth. I can handle the truth, right? And now it's very much the truth is subjective, and it depends on when I'm ready to hear what.
Yeah, I think there's a great parallel in what you said. And when I spoke with the director Alice Gu on my show, who directed The Donut King, when she talked about the Cambodian refugees who came over, and a lot of their children, or especially the grandchildren, have no idea about the backgrounds and the context of the war and the huge genocide which they escaped, or their grandparents escaped from, and the scars of that. The older generation have tried, for the most part, not to pass it on. And one of the main takeaways was that the new generation is so not aware of it. The huge element is also for them not to have to relive the trauma, just because the trauma is so severe, where families are being displaced, where people are being killed, and the normal civilian life just doesn't exist. Whereas for them, so I think similarly in your situation, I think for your mom just to relive that, and it must have been very emotional, and maybe it'll take more than just a podcast for her to be completely raw, and she might also peel back some layers which she's withholding.
And you make such a good point. My sister, who's downstairs right now looking after my puppy, and my brother, who were born here in London, in the United Kingdom where we live, they are my sister and my brother. They're from the same sort of family generation as me, and they have no idea. Sometimes we have conversations and I'm like, oh, do you remember that time we didn't eat for 3 days? Oh God, that was awful. And my sister's like, what? You didn't eat for 2 or 3 days? I'm like, yeah. No, I remember we couldn't get any food and it was too, but I remember I have these patchy memories. And that's just within like one family group. That's within our generation. So it's so easy to forget. And you know, that old adage, the maxim, you know, we are doomed to repeat history unless we learn from it. And I believe that so much. This is why I do so much work with the United Nations. I do work with the UNHCR. I try and get information and access. You made a really interesting comment about how that fractured sense of self, sense of identity plays into my work. I chase these things. I mean, look, the traffickers is a harrowing, difficult, incredibly dangerous journey. Like, I met murderers, killers, traffickers, sex offenders, baby robbers, like you name it. So for me, it felt very normal when I was making the traffickers to put myself in those situations, because I think you always look for the trauma you're familiar with, right? And it felt normal to be there with a people smuggler, because I was smuggled. So it's interesting you mentioned that.
Yeah, your sense of danger is not a normal 33-year-old British person's sense of danger. So, and so let's rewind back. I know you were talking about originally planning to come to Germany. So what was the journey like from coming from Pakistan, or trying to escape from Pakistan? And as you mentioned, there were a few yo-yos where you had to come back to Afghanistan, go back. But then talk us a little bit through finally ending up in the UK, and then how much of it do you remember?
I remember, so let's be literal, the minute I landed, I remember we flew back in those days. There was no trucks, there was no border, you know, there's none of this ICE, none of this like hostile environment nonsense that we exist today. Back then it was noble and it was honorable to be a refugee. It was something that we, as an international community back in 1993, 94, we knew that these people were all of our responsibility. So when we came to the UK, we flew, And I remember landing in Terminal 3, Heathrow Terminal 3, which I travel through multiple times a year. So it's a really interesting phenomenon. And I remember being on the travelator, like the escalator, but straight.
Yeah.
And I remember going back and forth, because my mom chickened out, right? She has to declare herself.
Right.
The people smuggler had gone. She has to declare herself to customs and border patrol. And she's chickened out. She just sat there. And I remember just going back and forth, like, wow, look at how quiet it is here. I grew up with noise, with violence, with fear, with my mum constantly being on guard or whatever. So it was very strange to be somewhere so quiet and so orderly. Everything had a place, and people would go to these little places, and then they would go to these things. So I remember being struck by how quiet and how organized everything was. Years later now, I look back at the time when I was 6, 7 years old, and I remember truly how lucky I was to be put in a London school that was so diverse. Lucky I was to have the friends I had. Lucky I was to have the exposure to multiculturalism and difference and people who didn't look like me. And it just felt so normal. And they treated me like I was normal. So it's sad that we've lost those things. It's sad that nowadays race and ethnicity come before humanity. And that's what my work really tries to unpack and understand. Like, why have we built these systems? They don't serve us. So it's interesting now to think back on those days and be like, I can't believe I got lucky again and again and again, and not in the normal ways. I didn't get lucky because like my mum had a great job, or we had loads of money, or I went to some posh boarding school. None of that. Quite the opposite. But I got lucky because I was with a bunch of friends that loved me and cherished me, and I didn't speak a lick of English, and that was okay. And a school system that incorporated my differences. And so I grew up being British Afghan, whereas I think now you have to choose between British and Afghan. So to answer your question directly, from the work that I'm doing right now, and the journalism and the interviews and the research and writing all these podcast episodes for Course Correction, I'm learning slowly and slowly. The group will always change, Rohan. The fear is what's human. We fear things that are different to us. We panic when we're confronted with situations that we're not familiar with. We like normality and repetition because it makes us feel safe. Unfortunately, that's not the real world. People think that immigration, or like being a refugee like me, is a super new concept. Sit down. People have been moving around this planet for as long as there has been people, hundreds of thousands of years. It is our nature to explore, to go and see.
To your point, I think a person's truth is what they believe in. And a lot of the times when they are put in a different situation where either nobody looks like them, or the rule is completely different. Now you yourself have traveled extensively. You also know what is permissible in one country could get you jailed, probably non-bailable in another country. And it could be as minor as even chewing gum. So it's, but the reason I think it's specifically mentioned is because on one hand, United States claims to be the most democratic country in the world. And that's why if you're trying to hold it accountable, because most of the other countries don't say that. So the greatest country in the world, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, in your situation,
I find America so fascinating because I've always thought of America. I've always thought of America as a really strange country. That there's this idea that America has always thought of itself as like the people who created freedom and who created equality. Well, actually, France has that claim first. Egalitaire, fraternitaire. I've forgotten the third one. Equality, fraternity, and
there's another one in there. Yeah.
Egalitaire, fraternitaire. I think it's equality or something. I can't remember. Anyway, the point is we have these systems where we think we're the first people to invent it. So like young people nowadays, like the Gen Z, are just like, oh, we've just discovered this thing. Like we just discovered equality. We've just discovered fairness and stuff. And that's beautiful. I think it's lovely. America as an ideal serves the planet. I love it. I love these ambitions that America has. And so my idea of like America and the relationship I have to it, even Britain, I mean, Britain hasn't done much good in the land I was born in Afghanistan, but I'm British Afghan. So inherent in me as a human being, as in my characteristic, there's this duality that doesn't sit comfortable. There's this tension. Like, I'm British Afghan, I'm Western and Muslim. I'm a woman and a feminist, but I also am a Muslim. So I've learned to be comfortable with the different parts of myself. And listen, Rohan, these are not problems we need to solve. These are just things we are. Why do we consider them to be problems? I don't understand. Like, you can be asked a question about how you feel and what you think about something, and say, I haven't finished thinking about it yet. Yeah. It might take me 10 years to think about this and come up with an answer. And I'm okay with that.
You can go to Instagram and find your favorite guru giving you life coaching tips and giving you all the answers, and you click on their course and you'll have all the answers within, and then you might have to
$500.
Yeah, exactly. I want to ask you, how did you get into journalism? I think it's a natural fit for you, but how did you break into the BBC, and what made you, when was that decision-making process and you wanted to be a journalist or a documentary filmmaker?
Yeah, I wanted to be a journalist since I can remember. I wanted to, probably since the age of 15, the attack, the atrocities that were committed on the Twin Towers and the people that lost their lives there. But then the narrative after that about Afghanistan, all of a sudden, this like dusty little country in the middle of nowhere, Central Asia, had the world's eye on it, quite literally. And the month after 9/11, I don't know if your audience knows this, the month after 9/11, the bombing campaign from America and the ISAF, the international forces in Afghanistan, specifically America, was so intense. They dropped so many bombs, they so many drones, that it was incredible. The country was a dust storm, the nation, just because of the amount of attacks that happened in the month after 9/11, because America had been punched and it wanted to punch back, but it punched down. We're talking about people who back then had an illiteracy rate of 98%. It's now closer to 60-70%, but that's through a lot of hard work by Afghans themselves. So I'm looking at these stories. I'm looking at the story of like, oh, heroic English American white man goes and shows the brown skinned person, terrorist man, what for? And I'm like, that's not true. And my mum would see, there's a town called Wootton Bassett here in the UK, and it's traditionally where fallen soldiers are brought through on their way back to the UK. And I remember watching my mum. I would come home and she's like on the Jai Namaz, right, in prayer. She sat on the prayer mat and she's crying. I'm like, why are you crying? And she's like looking to the BBC and just like, she goes, a mother doesn't know the difference between one and the other. A mother today lost a son. Whether they're British or they're Afghan, I cry because I know what it must be like for that mother. I can understand. And then we would watch like Afghan TV, like Ariana or Tolo TV, and we would see that these bombs that were dropped, then, in the British news, it was covered for like 20 seconds. In the Afghan news, that's a 1-hour special. So I saw this strange dichotomy of us and them, and I was just like, I'm us and them. Yeah. I'm both. I love that about myself. So I decided to kind of like pitch these documentaries, and it was actually Reva Sharma, previously Reverend Kumar at the BBC, who gave me a shot. And I made a pitch, and the BBC, Danny Cohen at the time, said, yeah, okay, you're 19, you've never done journalism before, you want to go to Afghanistan in the middle of a war zone? Off you go, on assignment. And I got shipped off to Afghanistan.
So isn't it kind of ironic that you, being an Afghan refugee, has opened the door for your journalism career by being sent back to Afghanistan as your first assignment?
It is no coincidence.
Yeah.
And what's really important to remember is that my mum worked really hard to make sure that I keep my mother tongue. So when we were growing up in the UK, my mum specifically chose to speak Dari Farsi with me and my younger sister, because she said it's one of the best gifts I can give you. You will always have a connection to this land, even if you can't be there. because you will speak the tongue. And so when it came to this moment, when there was such fascination, such interest, such need for accurate information from Afghanistan, of course I was going to do it. There was no better person in the country that could have done it. So like I say, you know, wherever your listeners are right now, and however they feel about immigrants and refugees, you should always remember that we come with a rich and beautiful culture that stands behind us. So when we come to your shores, what you see is an ugly, scraggly, dirty, you know, person who can't speak the language, who doesn't understand your culture and your customs. But what you should know is behind that, if you just give that diamond a little bit of a rub and try and give it some education and give it some opportunities, lies a person who can do amazing things, can cook amazing food, can bring amazing culture, can give you access to amazing things. So I don't think that if I was an American, I don't know if they would have seen that. It was the fact that I was British Afghan that I was given that opportunity. So it's no coincidence, Rahan, to me that I made that film. And that film went on to win one of the highest audience appreciation ratings of anything the BBC has made ever. Wow. So that's something I'm desperately proud of, that the audience connected with it. And after that, you know, I was able to make other films about women's bodies, about culture, about education that I really cared about.
Because it's very important, like whenever I talk to guests who are accomplished in their fields, and I like to talk a little bit about when they were probably not as famous, or a little bit about their backstory. And I can guarantee you 99%, the perseverance part comes through, just because they're like, listen, I was rejected 9 times out of 10, and it was just me. And only now
I'm rejected today 9 times out of 10. You know, like I have an idea for a documentary, or I have an idea for a series or whatever, and I'll pitch it to like so many people, dozens of channels and SBOs, and it's like, no. But you only need someone to say yes once. You know, I always say this to my sister who's living this reality. You know, she got a degree, came out of a recession, jumped into a pandemic, and now we're living through what could be another economic crisis, a global depression. Yeah. My God, she has to work harder every day to be motivated than I do. Yeah. So completely agree. Yeah, you just have to hang in there, resilience. And look, it's always fascinated me how the definition for insanity and success are the same thing, right? You repeat something again, like again, and you expect a different result, but that's what it takes. You've got to be a little mad to be a little successful.
You've already made a difference by telling people that you still get rejected 9 times out of 10. That itself is motivation enough without us trying to be motivational. That's not what we are at all. So you've already, and that's what I'm saying.
This is so much fun. Yeah, this is so much fun. I feel great.
It's brilliant. It's the smaller things. So I want to segue now and make it a little bit lighter. And has your mom passed on any culinary skills to you? I have a feeling not.
So you are incorrect to the highest degree.
Really?
I am a master chef of Afghan cuisine. There is no dish, I mean, including like this one particular dish, which is the head of a goat, that we cook in Qurbani at the end of the second Ramadan, I believe. At the end of the second Eid. No, I am an exquisite chef. I can make qabli and mantu and sabzi and burani bonjon and chalao, palau, all of the stuff that you want, man. Like you should come to London. You should come and taste the great. The thing with food is, and I'm the only one of my 4 siblings that learned to cook Afghan food. It wasn't because I was a girl, because we have 3 girls. It was because for me, cooking food was spending time with my mother, you know, where we weren't talking about my lipstick or my hair or my clothes, or did I study or did I sleep or did I put the oil in my hair, or, you know. Cooking with my mom was a time when we could gossip, you know, we could connect, and I felt that it was a great source of like getting her guard down and like connecting with my mother. So for me, I would spend hours filling dumplings with my mom. I would spend hours cooking rice, because I felt like A, I'm a creative person and I like creating things, and B, it's just some of my best memories of my mother when she's joking, when she's being a little cheeky, she's being a little silly, is when we're cooking. So actually, I'm a masterful chef.
I
I'm
humbly
vegan
apologize.
now.
You're vegan?
No, I'm vegan. Yeah, I've been a vegan for 7 years. In fact, it was after I went to Vietnam that I became vegan. But
that's an
now that I'm
oxymoron.
vegan,
An Afghan who's a vegan. You might be the
I
only one in
know.
the world.
I think there are two of us. I met her the other day. So no, I've been a vegan for 7 years, since 2014. And I am very, very happy and proud to be. Again, look, if you want to cut my identity, you can cut 1,000 different ways and get impossible answers. Yes, I'm British, I'm Afghan, I'm vegan, I'm Muslim, I'm secular, I'm Western, I'm Eastern. You can like look at these and be like, this is inconsistent. And I'm just like, and yet here I am.
Okay, brilliant. And that's brilliant news, because you're going to have some really great content. And thank you, Nelufar. I really, really genuinely appreciate having you on the Better Than Peter podcast. For me, I still can't believe that you started so young and so mature in your outlook, but just keep creating that kind of content. And we'd love to continue watching more of you.
Thank you so much.